Welcome back to Checkpoint. Now, today we're discussing this whole bill to do with NGOs and their funding and their regulation. Now, you will recall that miscellaneous amendment bill 2013 that sought to make amendments to the Public Benefits Organization Act 2012. Many of us caught the big one, and it was all about the money, about capping the foreign funding by 15%. But there's more to it than that, and the question we will be asking today is Parliament trying to muzzle civil society, or has civil society failed to regulate itself? And those are the questions we'll be discussing today. And I'll start by introducing the guest to Checkpoint, Suba Churchill, who's the coordinator of the National Civil Society Congress. Thank you for joining us on Checkpoint today. Moses Kuria, political strategist, and our analyst, Professor Kisiangani. Let's start with you, Prof. Your thoughts on this bill? Parliament at it again?
Yeah, Parliament has perfected the art of irritation, and they are irritating the public for no reason. They are drawing our attention for wrong reasons. I think there is increasing paranoia, and it has a history in Parliament that most parliamentarians have made a lot of mistakes which were unconstitutional, including adding themselves heavy packs. They have made mistakes, and NGOs together with the media have in the past criticized Parliament for some of the mistakes that the Parliament has made. So the only way to deal with this is to make sure that the media's mouth is closed, and eventually the NGOs are incapacitated. They have no business reducing percentages. They are not the ones giving the money. All we need to know is to have to put in place mechanisms that can ensure that the money brought in by donors is used correctly. That's all they need to do.
Okay.
So they have no business. This regulation that is coming, they are not the ones spending the money. So it's some kind of paranoia. It's a disease which must come out of that house. I don't know why they are in that kind of state.
Moses, do you think civil society has lost its relevance?
Well, you cannot tell someone whether they have lost their relevance. It's up to them, as long as they are operating within the laws of the land, as long as they are not infringing on people's rights. I would not say that anyone has lost their relevance unless they are criminals. But I would want to agree with Professor Kisiangani that what is required is a mechanism for ensuring that money that is received in the name of Kenyans, because whether that money is coming to government or that money is coming to civil society or NGOs, it's actually received in the name of Kenyans, that we know where this money is going. And if Professor had cared to read the amendments, that's the whole import. I've read through the regulations, and it is not correct to say that the regulations are trying to impose 15% cap on foreign donations. You can receive up to 120% if you want. All you need to do is that if it's above 15%, declare that this money is coming from Sweden, and it is for eliminating polio in the county of Marakwet. So that we take it that way. And if you think that you need to receive more, or you need to say, the money I received, 15%, added to the 10% that I got from the local donors, is not enough. So I do hereby declare that I need more. As long as someone is sure what the money is for, as long as someone is sure that this money is for doing the right things, then there shouldn't be a problem for disclosure. The other day we passed the Political Parties Act, and the civil society organizations were actually the ones who are pushing for political parties to be regulated. And you wonder what is good for the goose has to be good for the gander as well. Why is it okay for political parties to be regulated and not civil society organizations? Okay. And by the way, what we call non-governmental organizations is not non-governmental, because this money is coming from government out there. So they are actually governmental organizations for as long as they're receiving money from governments. And you look at countries like the United States. I am actually going to try and move an amendment in Parliament through my friends to say that if you receive above a certain threshold from out there, it's okay, you can receive as much as you want, but also categorize yourself as a foreign agent, so you know for who you are.
All right. Okay. Suba, you have been on record saying that this is an attempt to punish civil society for their stand on the ICC. Is this all politics?
One, it is important that we put a few things in perspective. The Public Benefits Organizations Act was an initiative of the civil society. And any government, be it Jubilee or the Grand Coalition government, cannot claim credit for the passage of the public benefits organizations. It was indeed moved in Parliament, the floor of Parliament, by the former nominated MP Sophia Abdi. And we were happy with it because since 2006, when a policy framework was passed, we have been working collectively with government towards the realization of this law. Now, the law as it is, whatever was passed, and which is yet to come into force, by the way, is good enough. What has raised our tentacles is this idea borrowed from countries that are leading from the bottom in terms of democratic dispensation, like Russia, like the Gambia, Ethiopia, name it, that, you know, there will be a limit to what the resources that public benefits organizations can get from outside. What we are asking is there such a provision? Kuria has mentioned about the political parties, but we know that in every financial year there's a budget for political parties. Mm-hmm. Is there a budget for civil society?
Yes, there is.
There is none, so don't lie between the teeth. And these are the facts that we must put on the ground. Mm-hmm. So when you limit, at a time when we know that there are certain key political leaders that are still choking with anger and panting with rage about civil society for having gone to court, joining the presidential petition, for cases going on at the ICC. These are the issues behind this bill.
Okay, let's talk about regulation as well. And when we look at the past and with the NGO Coordination Board and how that has been able to regulate, you know, players within the sector, yes, has that done well?
It's done pretty well. The only difference is that the NGO Coordination Act of 1990 has been overtaken by events because civil society today, you know, has different modes of registration. There are those that have registered as trusts. There are those that register societies with the Attorney General. So the scattered registration has put paid to any effort to regulate.
Wouldn't that be a good idea? Because now it will be under the Ministry of Planning and Devolution. So all of these things coming under one body. And even when we talk about regulation, let's talk about some of the numbers. The NGO Council, to what extent are you able to censure some of the members of the organization when they don't spend money as they should? Here are some numbers for you. I think in 2004, yes, it is true you suffer from funding.
Yes.
Only 400 out of in 2004, out of more than 3,000 members had paid up.
Yes.
And I think in 2008, you had a number of complaints before you, half of which were only heard partially.
Yeah.
When you look at all of these things in terms of regulation of the NGO sector of itself, would you say then that you've still done well?
It's not the NGO Council that regulates. It's the NGO Coordination Board.
Yes.
Which is a parastatal, so to speak. The executive is appointed by the authorities, the minister concerned. Even to date, we have the NGO Coordination Board. The ones that are members of the council are groups that have registered under the NGO Coordination Act of 1990. Mm-hmm. Now, that council has been fraught with a lot of factionalism, the politics. We know that, you know, in the previous government, one faction was allied to PNU.
I think
the other faction was allied to the opposition. And therefore, that compromised the integrity of civil society at that point.
So civil society has had integrity issues, you would agree?
That is true. And that is why we saw it necessary to come up with a regulatory framework called the Public Benefits Organizations Act. What we are saying is that this law is good. Why can't we implement it? Why should we want to amend it even before it is tested, so that we see how effective it is?
Professor?
You see, there are several issues here, and we are mixing them. Before this debate gains territory, the first thing is the fact that Parliament seems to be making moves to gag the NGO. That is a big issue. And what is the motive? You asked, and I think the motive looks more political than purely patriotic and professional. But also, that does not make us, you know, keep quiet when we look at what the NGOs is doing. There is a big question out there in the public domain that these NGO groups are a disorganized group working on everything and mastering nothing. And therefore, the country, the Republic, has a duty to find out what the NGOs do. Probably, in terms of regulation, if Parliament had come up and said, we want a thematic approach so that all NGOs are categorized according to services they offer and registered. So, and we must have a certain number within that category working for this and must have a certain financial base to do this. And then with what my brother Moses has said, we also give them the rules on how they operate. They must declare how much money. We have had cases where several NGOs have received money in the name of Kenyans and put up bungalows in the cities of Nairobi and even in Mombasa. Is this what we want? So these are issues which are really not related. With the fact that we are questioning Parliament doesn't mean we are praising NGOs. And I expect Suba to also say that there's a crisis in the NGO. Public confidence in NGOs is not there.
At this, Moses, you agree? Crisis in NGOs?
Let me just first of all touch on something Professor has said. Let's look at something called the normal distribution curve of the NGOs. Where are the bulk of the NGOs? They are not in provision of healthcare. They are not in provision of water. They are not in provision of, for example, preventable diseases. They are not in provision of fighting against FGM. They are not in fight against, for example, early marriages in some of the areas of this country. They are all in Nairobi, in some posh hotels all the time. How come that the bulk of the NGOs are all about governance? I want my brother here. I've known him for 20-something years.
Yes.
How much money have you received for the last 21 years since I knew you, since you joined the civil society? How much have you declared? You've been in this game before. How much of that has changed the life of Kenyans? How come that the bulk of you guys are in what we call the governance sector, despite the fact that over the ages, we had Section 2A, that was repealed. I was with you in the NGOs that particular time. Exactly. We came all the way.
Welcome back.
No. You cannot. I cannot come and I think I would want to go and change the life of Kenyans where it matters in terms of healthcare, in terms of issues that mean something, that put food on the table for Kenyans. But how come you guys are all about reform, change, all that? How? If you just get all this money that you're getting from donors, from Scandinavians, from the rest of the Europeans, from the Americans, and you put that to Turkana, and you put that to Marsabit and to northern Kenya and to areas that have got real issues in this country, no one would have a problem with that. But how come all this money is for what I would call noise making?
So not really noise making. One thing I like about Kuria is his honesty, because he has zeroed in on the governance. You see, the Bone government has to pick with NGOs working on governance. And that's the crux of the matter. Now, I also want to correct my brother Kasiangani and say that it is not Parliament. Let's put the blame where it belongs.
Where is
in
that?
The manifesto of Jubilee, they say that Jubilee government will ensure that charities engage in their core remit. And that's what Kuria is underscoring here. So you can see where it is coming from.
But
it
would
is
you
from
agree
the
that
executive? And I'm saying, I'm not here to defend the civil society, NGOs. And I've already underscored the fact that civil society come in different forms. Trusts that are registered by the Ministry of Lands. So you cannot blame the entire spectrum of civil society just because of, those that they categorize as governance. But I agree, and we recognize that there is need to bring back sanity to the sector. And that's why the Public Benefits Organization, and let me say it for the upton time, was an initiative of the civil society. We recognize the need for self-regulation.
All right, but let's take it back
to... But our problem is these amendments that are being brought, not by Parliament, but by the executive, drawn from the Jubilee Manifesto, to ensure that NGOs leave the governance that Kuria is talking about, to ensure that certain NGOs that joined the presidential petition are incapacitated, as Kasiangani pointed out. These are the issues that we should address.
So, but would it be time to just move forward a little bit?
Yes.
From issues of governance to other issues of bread and butter?
And I want to say, contrary to what Moses Kuria is saying, 95% of health services are provided by NGOs. Which hospital is functional in Mandera that is government? And who has been feeding people with relief? Is it government? Who has been providing ARVs? How much of that comes from government?
Moses?
These are the facts.
And if that is fact, facts are indisputable. No one would have a problem with that. Because, first of all, those NGOs will not have a problem of saying we are receiving so much money from donor X for doing Y.
Yes.
The whole thing here is probity. The whole thing here is about what I would call material disclosure. That if I'm receiving money in the name of Kenyans, even to complement government resources, and that is welcome in the northern Kenya, let me say that I would have no problem disclosing that I've received $10 million for provision of polio vaccination in this part of Kenya. Who would have a problem? It is a kind of people he's talking about, like Africogs, who receive 99% of their money from out there. And that's why I'm saying, even I will try to influence a change of this registration when it comes to Parliament, so that the rights of Africog are actually registered as a foreign agent, not as an NGO.
Let me tell you,
there's something that we really need to point out here, that Churchill is even not saying Parliament is involved in this. He's taking the position that this is a Jubilee matter. I don't think I can come to a show like this one and be naive enough to start playing the politics of political parties the way Churchill is doing. That one destroys the quality of the debate. We are not interested in whether this is a code thing or it is a Jubilee matter. We are looking at it. If you want to pass the law, who does it? The legislature does it. That is Parliament. And this matter has been brought before Parliament. We don't care about the sponsor. But you will be shocked that even when the voting is done, it is done and there are people from both sides of the divide also voting like the media bill. It is not one party thing. But the moment now NGOs speak like that, they disqualify themselves from serving Kenyans in Mandera who are both CORD or Jubilee or even any other political party. So the best way to approach this issue is to recognize that Parliament should not be allowed to enter into some legislative agenda that is meant to make a revenge on NGOs. We shall need the NGOs in terms of the services they offer. But we want them to do full disclosure of the funds they use in the name of helping Kenyans when we know that sometimes they don't even help. Secondly, we want, even when they focus on governance, do they have governance structures? It is in the NGOs where a brother takes over something and then another brother takes over and then they employ the sisters and the cousins and everybody. Everybody can work in this place. Anybody who wants to look for a job can enter the NGO world. We want a place which also has some professional standards set. When you work for an NGO, what qualification do you have?
Suba?
I think there is no problem about professionalism in the NGO sector. The donors that fund NGOs have never complained, even about lack of accountability. Which donor, and I now challenge you, has complained that you know of, that their funds have not been accounted?
Moses?
That's one.
Moses?
Two, if you talk about professionalism, the NGOs of today are not the NGOs of yesteryears. Today, project proposals are marked like exams. And you have to pass every stage of the way and demonstrate that you have a board in place, it is a functional board. And so if somebody wants to bring about issues of accountability, no NGO has lost money to the tune that the Auditor General disclosed government could not account for. So we cannot say it is only NGOs that do not account for money.
You see the
Okay, so the problem is it's not just that, it's not the NGOs, it's also other government organizations. So you're not denying that there's been some issues within the NGO sector.
I'm saying the reason we came up with the Public Benefits Organization, and I'm moving forward, you might think I'm static, but I'm moving forward, was to recognize the need for self-regulation. This PBO Act is about self-regulation. It creates a federation which will replace the NGO Council. It creates the Public Benefits Organization's regulatory authority. We are not against that.
Okay.
What we are saying is that this provision that are being inserted, this attempt by the new government to insert certain amendments, are meant to incapacitate NGOs with an eye on certain individual NGOs that Kuria has even had the courage to mention, so that they are incapacitated, so that they concentrate on provision of health, the charity I talked about. And that is what we are against.
You also need to point out, if you are honest with yourself,
yes,
you must point out, you have said that the NGOs of yesterday are not the NGOs of today.
Exactly.
The world politics has changed now. Mm-hmm. In the 1980s, before the collapse of the end of the Cold War,
yes,
and the collapse of the Berlin Wall,
mm-hmm,
the Western governments and even the Eastern governments used to give a lot of money to African governments, and they did not require accountability. Yes. It depended on where you are.
Okay.
Yes. But now, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, they demanded accountability on African governments and third world governments, but have never required the same from the NGOs.
Yeah.
So this is the point that we are discussing.
All right,
no.
Moses,
they require.
Moses?
Let me, I want to agree with Suba. Mm-hmm. Most donors don't ask for accountability. and no donor will complain. But these guys give kickbacks back to the donors, to some of the guys there in the donor community. I give you $1 million, and you give me back $100,000. That's what happens with these guys. So you
are saying they are corrupt.
They are corrupt. You see, dyed in the wool corrupt guys. These guys are corrupt. Let me just finish here. It's about two things here, Yvonne. One is about the giver. The giver will not ask for accountability for two reasons. One, they get some kickbacks back from these guys. Two, the reason they are given the money is not necessarily for transparent and accountable reasons. And that's what this bill is all about, that we have to know why this money was given in the first place. Which dams are you building? Which constitution are you making, and we made the Kenya Constitution in 2010. The other thing is, in whose name is this money given? This money is given in the name of Kenyans. So whether the donor asks for accountability or not, we as Kenyans have to ask for accountability. The same way we ask for accountability from political parties and from government. The same way government, executive have to go to parliament and get some oversight. Which is this body which is raking in billions of dollars that doesn't want to be monitored, that does not want to have some oversight.
I have a copy of the Public Benefits Organizations Act here. The trouble in this debate is that none of the two of you have read it. That's the challenge. I'm saying that there's a regulatory authority established in the Act. And because none of you have read it, you have no appreciation of the provisions of the Act.
Don't be rude.
It's not about being rude.
Yes,
it's about
you are making allegations. You cannot underrate our ability to read. We have read, but that is not the issue we are discussing.
Professor,
you are derailing us, isn't it?
When you say allegations, what accusations has he made? That donors are not demanding accountability?
So you counter it with other allegations?
If it was right and you never interjected, why should you interject when I'm saying? What I'm saying is that the Public Benefits Organizations Act is good law. These provisions, amendments being imposed and borrowed from countries that have enumerated, countries that rank bottom on the democratic
on that I agree with you. I have agreed with you.
Are the provisions that we are against? Okay. If you say we should not blame the executive.
When was the PBO Act passed?
The PBO Act was passed in February 2013, not even 2012.
So for the last 5 months, you have been okay? You have been accountable?
No.
Have you been accountable for the last 6 months that this Act has been in place?
The NGO Coordination Act.
Yeah.
It's still in force. It has not even commenced. The PBO Act has not even commenced.
And therein lies my question. So we are now in November. It was passed in February.
Yes.
That is 9 months. So for the last 9 months, you have been accountable. There have not been problems within the NGO sector.
There are no problems.
So that you can now pause and say,
the fact that there is no complaint doesn't mean there are no problems.
Okay.
No,
all right.
But you cannot act on the basis that there should be complaints when there is none.
Gentlemen?
You must cite complaints that have been raised.
Is there anything wrong with the NGO saying where they have gotten the money?
There's nothing wrong, and you have been saying that.
Is there anything wrong with saying how they are going to spend the money for?
We have been saying that.
Is there anything wrong with disclosing that I'm getting X% from donors?
That has been happening, but
then
because you left the sector, because Kuria left the sector, he thinks that NGOs are making money.
Then you are speaking the same language. All you are saying is transparency.
We are saying, Kasiagani.
People who work in the NGOs want to look poor. But this activism doesn't help you. You look poor, but you are taking money from people. We know that in the villages, you find people like
they go to great heights.
They have some registered NGOs which are supposed to put water and electricity, and then you go there. Even in my own county in Bungoma, I've seen this. You see some NGOs working there, but you don't see provision of services.
Okay, gentlemen, we need to bring our discussion to a close.
It depends on what you call services.
Sorry? It depends on
what services mean to him.
But
because
what would they mean?
What I know is that NGOs provide medical care. NGOs account for 95%.
Expired drugs. Expired drugs, some of them have come here through NGOs.
And the expired maize through government. So it's
tit for tat.
No, it's not about tit for tat. The role of NGOs is to complement government efforts. We are not a substitute for government. So what we are doing is because of failure of government. We are doing it because government has failed.
Okay, let's bring our conversation to a close. Let's bring our conversation to a close very quickly in about a minute, Suba. So what next? What's the plan now? Because I know you're planning a couple of protests against this bill.
We are saying that the Kenyan people, whether they are in the media, whether they are in civil society, will never cede an inch of this civic space that we have gained over the years, irrespective of who is in government. We are not going to cede any space because this law is about narrowing the civic space that Kenyans have fought for, have struggled for, have shed their blood for, have lost their lives for. And we are not going to allow that, irrespective of who is in power.
Moses, final words?
Your rights end where my rights begin. So those rights that you are claiming, they end where the rights of other Kenyans begin. The rights of other Kenyans start with transparency, with probity, with accountability, with material disclosure. And we are not going to cede an inch of demanding transparency from the NGOs and from the so-called evil society.
And the government as well.
Parliament is on the wrong foot by trying to revenge on NGOs for fighting some democratic practices within this administration, but Parliament has a right to ask for transparency. The NGOs have a right to complain against Parliament if Parliament is really revenging on them, but the NGOs must own up and also clean its house. They are not doing very well. That organization, we need more transparency on how you use your money. So whichever way we do it, we must, Parliament and the NGOs must meet, agree on basic principles of what should go into the law that regulates both, and then say, this is what we want done, this is what we don't want done, and not included. Then from that point of view, we shall have a better law. But Parliament should not gag NGOs. NGOs also must not refuse to be transparent.
And they must not gag Kenyans.
And we must continue to demand accountability from government.
All right, and on that note,
we'll continue to do.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, gentlemen, and Suba, for joining our panel tonight, talking about that bill regarding the regulation of civil society organizations. That's it for Checkpoint. Thank you for watching.